Okay, this video is the beginning of Module 17, which has to do with aggregate demand. So, first thing that we have to talk about is what the heck is aggregate demand? Well, aggregate demand is looking at the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of aggregate output demanded. And our aggregate output is real GDP. Now, the difference between regular demand and aggregate demand is that regular demand, we're talking about one particular product. Okay, when we talked about regular demand, we looked at one specific product at a time. Aggregate demand, we're talking about all products. And so if we're talking about all products, that would be representative of GDP. Okay, so GDP is representing all products, as we're looking at all products as a whole, and aggregate price level is actually our price index. So when we graph this, it's going to look really similar to regular demand, but the difference is what we're labeling our axes. So when we graph this, our real GDP is going to be our x-axis. So remember when we did regular demand, that was quantity. Okay, so now we're talking about real GDP, how much of real GDP that we are actually demanding. And our y-axis is our aggregate price level, which is usually measured as a price index, particularly the GDP deflator. So now what we're doing is that we're just looking at, as the price level changes, how much spending, okay, is going to change. And if you remember, when we talk about GDP, we're talking about consumer spending, government spending, investment spending, and net exports. So aggregate demand includes all of that. Okay, so aggregate demand is looking at how much consumers are going to demand, government, businesses for investment spending, and foreigners. So that's what we're talking about with aggregate demand. So as you can tell, it is a downward sloping curve, which looks exactly like the demand curve. Okay, so why is it downward sloping? Well, if you remember when we talked about demand, we talked about why is the demand curve downward sloping. Why is it that when I drop the price of BW3s, for example, that more people were willing to go? Well, probably because of the fact, one of the reasons is that as I dropped the price, you felt richer because your money went further. You could go more times. Well, with aggregate demand, we can talk about something called the wealth effect, which is really similar. So the wealth effect is this idea that it changes our purchasing power, causes a change in consumer spending. So what this means is that as the price goes down, what happens to our purchasing power, the power of our money? Our power of our money goes up, right? Because it goes a lot further. Our money, as the price is, the aggregate price level is going down, the value of our money increases. So as a result, spending increases, and vice versa. So this is what we're basically looking at, is that inflation. So for example, 98, 2005, and 2013, look at the amount of stuff in my basket. Okay, the amount of stuff in the basket is decreasing, okay, because our money doesn't go as far. Our purchasing power has changed. All right, the other reason why the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping is something called the interest rate effect. Okay, the interest rate effect is a little more complicated. So the interest rate effect, how this works is that we are basically talking about the price level changing. So for example, the price level, I'm trying this for the first time. If the price level, let's say our price level is going up. Okay, as our price level is going up, so maybe we're going from this point right here to this point right here, right? So our price level is going up, we're going up the curve. As our price level is going up, what happens to the demand for money? Our demand for money is going to go up as well, right? Because since everything costs more, we're going to need more money to be able to buy stuff. So our demand for money is going to go up. Okay? Now, because our demand for money goes up, what happens to the interest rate on things like loans? If everybody wants money, oh my gosh, they're going to have to charge more. So the interest rate is also going to go up. Okay, so the interest rate goes up, And so if the interest rate goes up, we already talked about this in the last video. We talked about as the interest rate goes up, what happens to consumer spending? Consumer spending is going to go down, just like investment spending is going to go down. Okay, so this right here, okay, this right here is explaining why, as my price level goes up, my real GDP that's demanded goes down. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you're not confused by all of my drawing all over this. But this is explaining why the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping, because the wealth effect that our purchasing power has changed as the price level changes, and because of the interest rate effect. Since the price level changes, it affects the interest rate, which then affects consumer spending. All right, let me know if you have any questions. That's it for now.